Today, I will be discussing my archaeological and historical examination of the 19th century port of Washington, North Carolina. This presentation will seek to explain the relationship between economic factors and port development using the river port of Washington as a case study. To help understand this relationship, I will delve into analyzing the trade relationships both within and outside of the port, as well as analyzing construction methodology at 3 archaeological sites along the periphery of the port. A wonderful starting point to begin this recreation is to understand how the town developed from its founding to the 20th century. The town of Washington, situated at the confluence of the freshwater Tar River and the saltwater Pamlico River, served a prominent role in the development of the eastern part of North Carolina. Its location enabled the town to act as a shipping terminus for exportable goods from the state's resource-rich coastal plain, as well as offering a safe harbor for merchant vessels sailing from other Atlantic ports. During colonial times, Washington's chief exports included tar, pitch, turpentine, rosin, tobacco, shingles, and boards. Visitors to the town during this period, like William Atmore, remarked on the region's potential for trade and industry, as well as noting the importance of Washington as a trading center. The 1840 census listed the town as having produced 153,522 bushels of corn, 87,180 bushels of cotton, and 106,987 barrels of naval stores. Just prior to the Civil War, the river port was handling more than half of the waterborne commerce in the state. After rebuilding from the destruction wrought from the war, Washington rebounded and embraced the transition to industrial pursuits which characterized the state during this period. Historians Hugh Leffler and Albert Newsom stated that the decade of the 1870s was marked by transition, expansion, and the real beginning of the Industrial Revolution in North Carolina. Naval stores, the premier industry of the town and the eastern part of the state, lost out to the production of lumber. Merchants and other owners of sawmills shipped large quantities of readily available lumber to northern states, much as they did many years before, but now on a much larger scale. The 20th century presented a crossroads for the town of Washington. In terms of population and economic development, the town still appeared to be growing. Unfortunately, the technological advances made in the previous century became obsolete due to factors beyond the town's control. Steamers from the Norfolk Southern Railroad and Atlantic coastline continued to carry goods upriver and out towards the coast until transportation by rail and eventually automobile became the more economically viable option. Washington's usefulness as a trade port declined as rail terminals moved away from the town, taking with them the flow of trade. For this study, I examined 3 sites along the outside of the functional port of Washington. With the downtown of today's Washington in the top right of the screen, the sites from left to right correspond to the Eureka Lumber Company island structure, the S.R. Fallon Son Company sawmill, and the unidentified South Shore landing site. And each of these sites possesses a unique link to Washington's industrial and commercial past. So starting with Site A, also we refer to it as a South Shore landing site. We've got 2 site maps here. On the left-hand side is Site A North and South, and on the right-hand side is Site A East. And the reason these are separated is because we use 2 different baselines to survey and record these sections. It'll become evident, these are connected eventually, but for recording purposes and illustration purposes, these had to be done separately. So in November of 2019, a team of ECU faculty and students surveyed an unidentified waterfront structure along the southern shoreline of the Pamlico River. This inconspicuous site across the river from downtown presented significant challenges during the background research phase, but eventually evolved into one of the more interesting and complex sites surveyed. In total, this site, shown through these illustrations, encompassed roughly 730 square meters of riverbed and a significant terrestrial portion alongside of that. And the left-hand site map, you can see starting from the right-hand side extending about 8 meters into the middle of the map, there's a wooden structure that was discovered. This structure also corresponds to a significant drop-off in river depth from the exposed terrestrial site located south of it, beneath it, where those green contour lines are, and on the other side, which was too deep for us to get accurate depth measurements. It was above an average 6-foot tall person's head. The edges of the structure specifically are rounded, potentially evidence of a milled piece of lumber. Almost adjoining this structure at a 45-degree angle is another piece of the wooden structure, sharing the same construction characteristics. On the other site map, this structure continued. It formed a jointed right angle and continued back towards the shoreline shown there. Where the two pieces of lumber met, there were two holes which appeared to be the location of fasteners, each approximately 5 centimeters in diameter. And both of these sites, as shown in these site maps, contained large quantities of brick, cobble, and ballast stones, in addition to other material culture. And these are some of the examples of the material culture found. You can see examples of bricks in the top left-hand, right-hand corners, an example of the ballast stone in the top middle, a glass fragment that was discovered that corresponds to a 19th century liquor wholesaler from Baltimore, Maryland. And on the bottom center and right-hand side, you can see a fragmented barrel head and a barrel stave as well. So analyzing the structure itself, the archaeological record indicates that it is a crib-cob-wharf hybrid. In her article discussing vernacular construction methods, Molly R. McDonald defined crib wharfs as having perpendicular, alternating horizontal headers and stretchers, in addition to containing floors to help retain the cobbles, gravel, and other types of fill within them. Cob construction, on the other hand, refers to a framework of headers and stretchers forming a cell or crib unit, constructed of either squared timbers or logs in the round. Furthermore, she claims that cob wharfs needed larger fill, ballast, and cobble in order to weigh the structure down. So moving to the next site, which we term Site B, it corresponds to the S.R. Fallon Son Company sawmill, and there's two piers that are associated with it. One close to the modern bridge that's there, that you can see in the image on the top, and one further downriver to the east of it, which you can barely see at periods of regular tide, but that's demonstrated in the bottom image. So this sawmill was incorporated in 1892, and it was constructed, like I said, next to the historic Pamlico River Bridge, which is now the modern North Carolina Highway 17 business bridge. For this survey and this site map that's shown here, this is a 160 square meter survey zone, and there are 7 pilings that were located and recorded there. Embedded in the riverbed, these pilings had deteriorated to some extent and possessed little resemblance to the original form. Further out, as shown in that top image, beyond those two gentlemen conducting the survey methodology we were using, there was an additional 9 pilings measured, with diameters ranging from 16 centimeters to 22 centimeters at the riverbed, where they are embedded at on the bottom of the river. At the water's surface, these same pilings measured from 6 centimeters to 23 centimeters with varying degrees of degradation. On this western structure, there are no other diagnostic features like fasteners or horizontal crossbeams discovered there. Like I said, further east down the southern shoreline, additional pilings are visible alongside another modern structure. In terms of diameter, we sampled 29 of these pilings, and they range from 17 to 20 centimeters at the base, with, again, most of these deteriorating significantly. With the distance between pilings on a vertical axis, meaning from one set of 2 to the other leading out into the river, they range from 3.6 meters to 4.83 meters. The distance between them horizontally ranged from 1.53 to 1.94 meters. And some of these pilings still possess the horizontal beams, like you can see in that image beneath them. These ranged in length from 2.31 to 2.5 meters. They had a width ranging from 16 and 20 centimeters, and a height ranging between 13 and 18 centimeters. And so trying to characterize those two structures itself, I looked at a particular scholar, Joseph Norman, who described these pilings as columnar members, or described pilings as a whole as columnar members which are driven vertically or near vertically into the ground to form a foundation for construction purposes or to act as a barrier against horizontal forces. He classifies pilings into 2 groups: sheeting piles, which would be used for perimeter purpose, such as those used in cofferdams, and heaving piles to support material constructed on top of them. At first glance, these piling structures align more with Norman's description of heaving piles. The archaeological record certainly supports that notion, since many of the eastern pilings still have their horizontal component attached to them, And an example of one of those eastern piles is on the left-hand side of the screen with the fastener still attached, showing the level of deterioration at the site. And the image in the middle is the bird's eye view of the fastener head. An understanding of how timber would be floated down the Tar River to the foul mill, as well as the labeling on the 1901 Sanborn map, point towards these two piling platforms forming a basin or a log boom, which raw timber from upriver could be stored for processing later, which they serve to trap or catch lumber being towed or floated downriver, and so it could be stored there for processing later. And these are three bricks that were photographed and recorded, and just to contrast from the bricks discovered earlier at Site A, and to show the difference in time period that these two sites were utilized. And lastly, we turn towards the Eureka Lumber Company island structure, and you can see it's a particularly hazardous site. We couldn't use the same survey methodology where we strung tapes and got in the water as a big group. So we had to come up with different ways to interpret and record this site. Luckily, I was the beneficiary of a 2004 sonar expedition out to the Pamlico River, where I was able to sift through this data and recreate the perimeter of the structure itself. And you can see with the green arrow at the top, the furthest upriver extent, where it still shows the below the waterline horizontal pieces of the structure itself. And at the gray arrow, many of the pilings on the river side of this structure still had buttressing them sheet planking. That's where vessels would have berthed alongside it, so those pilings needed additional support. And in those two blue rectangles at the bottom, that's where lumber had washed away or fallen off of the site itself and is now deposited in the middle of the navigable channel. When taking a look at some of the material culture we found, like I said, the pilings on the riverside were significantly thicker in diameter, and so were the fasteners themselves. On the bottom right there's a fastener that had a 3 centimeter diameter compared to 2 centimeters on the shoreline side, and it was also 50.5 centimeters in length, which is it was a very heavy object to have found just laying. It was resting perfectly on top of a piling, not still attached to it. It was just resting there. It was unbelievable. And then another interesting object which was discovered was this piece of rail, which corresponds to, at the top of the screen, which corresponded to either the tramway that ran horizontally along the island structure or the tramway that connected the island structure to the lumber mill, which was situated on the mainland. And so the question remains, what do we do with all of this data? How can we use the archaeological record to support or contradict the historical data in showing why these things were constructed and how they were utilized in Washington's changing and evolving 19th and early 20th century port economy? And so considering the South Shore landing site, Site A, the true purpose and function of the landing remains shrouded in obscurity. What is clear, however, is that there are references to industry being present along the southern shoreline of the Pamlico River. An 1845 Tarboro Press article references turpentine distilleries located along the southern shoreline opposite Washington. The U.S. Coast Survey survey map from 1872 recorded the point as a rectangular structure with several small nondescript buildings and a point labeled windmill, which you can see in the top right. While these sources do not definitively state that this landing could have been the site of a turpentine distillery, the historical sources indicate some sort of industrial presence there. Regarding the windmill, other turpentine distilleries made use of similar machinery to provide water to cool the heated sills. National Park Service publications have noted that an industrial complex containing a turpentine distillery constructed by John Averitt Sr. in Onslow County possessed a windmill just for that particular purpose. As such, this site potentially formed a crucial component of Washington's early economy revolving around the production and exportation of naval stores. The South Shore landing site became either the repository for naval stores shipped downriver for producers along the Tar, or one of the manufacturing locations of the prosperous naval stores industry. When examined within the context of the early S.R. Fowle business records, the relationship between the landing and the Fowle's Castle Island infrastructure is evident. It could serve as a storage unit for naval stores, or any other commodity for that matter. which permitted the Fowles to use Castle Island primarily for their shipbuilding and shipping interests. Then it became an important part of the intra-harbor economy, which supplied naval stores and other commodities to local families such as the Havens, the Faroes, and the Marshes, as well as providing a commodity for export. After the war, planters and merchants contracted steamers to export their crop, which offered greater efficiency in shipping products up and down the Tar-Pamlico River and out into the Atlantic Ocean. William Blount Rodman's cotton records highlight his relationship with the Old Dominion Steamship Company. This company's physical presence on the Pamlico River, however, did not prove to be a fruitful relationship for William Blount Rodman. Compared to 1870, in 1874, William Blount Rodman exported a significantly greater amount of cotton to Baltimore, with the final 4 shipments borne by the Old Dominion steamers Olive and Pamlico. Interestingly, the final 2 shipments only contained 5 bales of cotton, compared to the shipments on January 9th and November 6th, which carried 40 and 30 bales respectively. In 1885 and 1887, Rodman's cotton exports decreased in terms of the price netted per pound in the New York marketplace. Whereas his earlier shipments averaged approximately 16 cents per pound of cotton shipped, his shipments to New York only netted approximately 10 cents per pound. Additionally, Rodman only shipped a total of 76 bales of cotton to New York, compared to 269 to Baltimore. These records do not correspond to any of the archaeological sites surveyed for the study, and attempting to correlate these statistics to these sites investigated is impossible. However, these records do indicate 2 things. First, the harbor network had been expanded to more people, thanks to more efficient waterborne transportation through steam. Rodman's transactions also signify a general trend away from shipping products like cotton and naval stores through small regional ports like Washington, when more efficient transportation means began to emerge and larger ports began to dominate the scene in the southern states. Another example of the expanding port network is evident within the manifest of the Styron Transportation Company. Whereas Washington's early trade network had goods flowing to Washington and farmers, merchants, and other community members obtaining important goods within the confines of the port, steam transportation expanded the intra-harbor network. Now communities such as Gaylord, Macleyville, Scranton, and Leechville, which had depended upon Washington since the town's founding, could have necessary supplies and groceries brought to them in a speedy, efficient manner, rather than sailing or poling the Tar-Pamlico River. Even the S.R. Fowle & Son Company contracted with the Styron Transportation to ship flour, coffee, and other items to Leechville on December 24, 1894. Conversely, Aurora, the steamer Aurora, enabled these smaller communities to utilize Washington's larger interstate shipping services to export commodities like potash, as well as providing a larger market for fishing communities along the Pamlico Sound. Other imports to Washington include common items such as chickens, eggs, and even carriages, which were excluded from the maps below. Interestingly, the S.R. Fowle & Son Company continued to export naval stores well into the latter part of the 19th century. What is curious is that they were only, when all of these shipments to New York, they were all sent to one particular industry company, the W.K. Henneman sailmaking company in New York City. Over time, the number of exports of tar, pitch, and turpentine and rosin drastically decreased, as you can see in that map above. Also, interestingly, over time, there's a greater attention paid towards the Caribbean market, where they would ship greater numbers of lumber, shingles, and staves compared to the naval stores exports that they were previously sending northwards. While the intra-harbor relationship certainly altered after the Civil War, waterfront industries still collaborated with one another. Once the Fowle sawmill was constructed and operational, they maintained relationships with complementary specialist businesses. The mill continued the relationships their predecessors had established with the Havens and the Blounts, while expanding their own intra-harbor network. Amongst their fulfillment records, the Fowle sawmill supplied lumber to the Havens family, the Myers and Son family, and even to their own business listed under the name of J.L. Fowle. Furthermore, their order forms shed light on the waterfront collaboration through specialized industries. Sawmills often did not possess the appropriate facilities to refine their product, so they sent them to planing mills. In the case of the S.R. Fallon Sun Mill, they became patrons of the Moss Planing Mill. Of over 800 orders, a total of 91 were from the Moss Planing Mill. Located on the eastern edge of the Washington waterfront, the planing mill would refine the cut timber in dimensional, functional pieces of planks and seasoned lumber. And lastly, the change in the evolution of the Eureka Lumber Company and the demise of the Fallon Sun Company sawmill, there is one source available through the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which recorded output levels of the two sawmills and others in the Washington downtown area. And you can see through this that the Eureka Company eventually supplanted the S.R. Fallon Sun Company and continued to prosper well past 1916, whereas the record for the S.R. Fallon Sun Mill stopped at 1916. And so in conclusion, structures were built according to economic needs. We transitioned away from the simple wharf to more complex pile-and platform structures like the S.R. Fallon Sun Company sawmill, as well as the Eureka Lumber Company, which were built for a specific purpose, to trap lumber in, as well as to support other infrastructural components such as tramways, the storage sheds on top of them. As also, trade networks within the harbor remained fairly similar. The same prominent families, the Fowles, the Havens, the Marshes, still traded and collaborated with one another to export whatever product it was that was manufactured or produced. Outside the harbor, these networks and trade patterns changed according to consumer demand, technological capabilities in terms of vessels, and what available exportable product there was. And you can see that transition, especially from from naval stores to lumber. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you to everybody listed here, and I hope you enjoyed listening to my presentation on the Washington port through the 19th century. Thank you.